Okay, let's get the show on the road. Board to reconvene. Call to order. Let's have a roll call, starting on the right.
Bob Harrington, Inyo County.
Peggy Breeden, City of Ridgecrest.
Mick Gleason, Kern County.
Peter Brown, Indian Wells Valley Water District.
Robert Pavelek, BLM.
Commander Brian Longbottom, Department of the Navy.
Let it be known that Bob Page is not here at the present time. We're expecting him soon. We've heard nothing contrary, so we're expecting him to be here shortly. But we have a quorum, so let's move on. We're going to start off this morning's meeting with Pledge of Allegiance. And Mr. Zadiba, would you kindly lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure. Place the flag and join the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Zadiba. Good job. Brings us to item number 3, public comments. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address this board relative to matters not on the agenda. This that no action may be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. By exception, we can grant longer time if required. Anybody willing to take? Ms. Oviatt.
Can I just say one thing since I'm doing the timing?
Yes.
Can I take one? You'll have just 3 minutes and it'll be green, and then at 1 minute it'll turn yellow. So I just am letting you know that that's what that's about. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning. I'm Lorelei Oviatt. I am the Kern County Director of Planning and Natural Resources. I have 2 items to chat about, so I would ask for an exception and have a couple extra minutes.
Granted.
The first is I would like to give you an update. We are launching in January our public process to develop a solar overlay zone district, and specifically in the Indian Wells Valley. It would be used over water-intensive projects. It is optional. It does not automatically mean that you can't do whatever you're doing now, but it's an option, and we've been working with with the state of California to bring transmission in, and we think we have that moving along. So we will make sure that everybody that the Groundwater Authority is on the mailing list. We'll make sure that anyone who would like to be on the mailing list contact my office. I'll use the same mailing list that I used for the Indian Wells Valley land use management when it comes to large groups. And I look forward to input on this project and moving this project along so that it's in place by the end of 2017. The second thing I'd like to update you on is I received a number of calls after the passage of Proposition 64 asking where marijuana cultivation could be done, what zone that's allowed in, and where it could be done in the Indian Wells Valley, as well as greenhouses. So I would like to let your authority know that at this point there is a moratorium in Kern County and unincorporated areas on all those types of activities. In addition, you are allowed to cultivate 12 plants for your personal use. Under the medical collective, inside or outside. I am launching, starting in January, a extensive conversation on the zoning ordinance and what the Board of Supervisors is going to consider. Are we going to ban everything? Are we going to allow certain things? What is it going to take to do that? And part of that will be an environmental impact report that will include all the environmental impacts from water to traffic to social concerns. So at this point, if someone does try to set up such an operation, please contact Code Compliance, because at this point we do have a moratorium on this. Those are the 2 items that I wanted to update you on, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Ms. Oviatt, a quick question. Give me a 2-sentence summation of your item number 1, solar overlays. Hit it one more time so the public truly understands what you're talking about.
We are going to create a zone district by which, by placing this over land, a solar company could come in, follow all the rules that are in this ordinance, and with a building permit, build a commercial solar project on specific pieces of land, rather than having to do their own environmental impact report and their own conditional use permit, which is a significant cost and could delay their project by another 2 years. And we are going to be using this tool here and in the Central Valley as a way for property owners to have other options if they have water-intensive current uses.
Thanks. And we're working closely with the Navy on determining exactly how this whole thing's going to roll out.
Absolutely, and all stakeholders.
All stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other members willing to take advantage of this opportunity for public presentations?
Mr. Chair, are we going to be able to ask questions of Lorelei at some point in time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank
We're
you.
going to have a rollout of. We're going to agendize Ms. Oviatt on a regular basis to give us constant updates on exactly how this thing is shaping up as we move forward, whether it moves or doesn't move. We will be the ones pulling the switches on that.
Good morning.
Please state your name.
Judy Decker. I have some comments for you. From comments made by the city and the water district, it appears they do not take in the fact that the Indian Wells Valley is in critical overdraft. They do not take this seriously. In fact, it appears that they intend to operate in a business-as-usual mode, allowing additional growth without the requirement of new development bringing supplemental water into this valley is irresponsible. Use of presently available water for new uses robs water and the rights to future water from those people already here. In the past 20-plus years, local governments have ignored the facts and recommendations of the scientific reports they paid for with our money. You are in the process of creating a new government to correct the above situation, not make it worse. The more you deny the problems and proceed as you always have, the sooner the state will control our water. You need to follow Mr. Gutierrez's recommendations of having a well moratorium on new wells until this problem is resolved satisfactorily. My references for my comments are Mayor Breeden, who has said repeatedly, if we are not growing, we are dying. The Daily Independent article by Jack Barnwell in yesterday's paper about the Indian Wells Valley Board meeting, entitled Indian Wells Valley Board Talks Conservation Plans for Potential Large-Scale Development. And the city attorney, Lemieux, who made the comment at the city council meeting of the 9th of September that critical overdraft was only an opinion. Comments were given last month by Chairman Gleason on his trip to Sacramento and meeting with David Gutierrez, DWR. These comments were omitted from the October minutes. I ask that they be included so they are not forgotten. I also respectfully request that my comments be placed in the minutes of the meeting for future reference. I'm sure they'll be useful.
Thank you, Ms. Decker.
My name is Renee West-Lusk, and I live within Ridgecrest city limits. I just wanted to bring this to your attention. It's about a state law, SB 837, that was signed by Governor Jerry Brown on June 27th of this year, and it's about the ability to regulate water for marijuana growing. And I assume the IWVGA will be aware of this bill. It has to do with licensing, I guess, all these entities, commercial entities, to use water for marijuana growing use. But My concern is the amount of water, and if there's going to be, more agriculture trying to switch and grow marijuana crops as opposed to other crops, and they'll end up using more water. They're saying a relatively large marijuana grower may need 30 acre-feet of water annually for his crop, which is enough to sustain 60 average California households for a year. And I just wanted to bring this to your attention because I'm really worried about the water use with this marijuana growing commercially.
Thank you. I'm sure we're going to have copies of that, but would you please leave your notes? Can you leave your notes with us?
Or I can make a copy and
Make a copy. That'd be great.
and bring it to you.
I'm sure we're going to be looking at that.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
just please leave your notes. Welcome, Mr. Lovingood. How are you, sir?
Doing well, sir.
Thanks for coming. Public presentations is still open. Okay, we'll close public comments, and begin item number 4, special presentations. 4A is a report by Tim Parker on technical progress in the IWV groundwater basin. Mr. Parker.
Let's see.
Is that it? Maybe? No, that's.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to give an update on some of the ongoing activities that have been happening over, the last several months because we haven't done that in this forum. And also to dive a little bit deeper into a brackish water resources study that has been discussed for a couple of years and some of the activities that have been occurring on that. And so here's some of the work in progress. So one of the things that's required under the law, under the State Water Resources Control Board water policy, is that you have to develop a salt and nutrient management plan. And this is related to the recycled water policy. And so the district took the lead on this with the city, working with the city. It really falls under its, because the district the water board's recycled water policy really encourages the increased use of recycled water. And there are potential groundwater quality degradation impacts associated with that if it's not done right. So the salt nutrient management plan helps to identify the potential salt nutrient loading in the basin, and then comes up with some monitoring and management options to reduce that loading. So the first step of that is to do the salt nutrient loading estimates, and that's there's a contractor on board, RMC, that's working closely with the district and the city to develop that nutrient loading, and they're going to be presenting that to the regional board. So that's the update on the salt nutrient management plan. Another thing that's been developed recently is a stream gauge instrument repair and measurement. And so there's a stream gauge on Sand Canyon and Grapevine Canyon that were both repaired by a contractor to, actually it's the district, but under the Cooperative Groundwater Management Group. Monitoring well installations for the CBs to install. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but the CBs under the Navy have been installing as an in-kind service to this basin a number of monitoring wells over the decades. And so we in the TAC, under the Cooperative Groundwater Management Program, developed locations, priority locations for about 20 wells. And the CBs will be hopefully able to install 3 to 4 wells a year over the coming years. And so I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Review of groundwater monitoring updates from Kern County Water Agency. Kern County Water Agency does the groundwater monitoring in this basin along with the Navy. And they've been doing that for a number of years. So that's one of the things that this cooperative TAC and Cooperative Groundwater Management Group review periodically is what's going on with the groundwater monitoring. And if you go to the Cooperative Groundwater Management Group webpage, there are groundwater level maps and depth to groundwater maps through 2015. They're working on 2016. Legislative and policy updates are given at these cooperative groundwater management group meetings. And then another item is the U.S. Basin Characterization Model refinement. So this is basically to estimate the past, present, and current future potential recharge in the basin. And the USGS just sent the contract over to Kern County this week. So we're hopeful that that can finally get started in the coming weeks and get that going. It's about a one-year project. So that'll be a refined recharge estimate of what's coming into the basin, which then will be hopefully incorporated into the modeling effort. And so I'm going to step out of order there a little bit and just say that the commander here, Brian Longbottom, will provide us a update on the modeling and also on kind of what the monitoring well drilling update is, and then I'll go to the next item.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Just for everyone, we're blessed here at China Lake to have the Navy's can-do construction force on staff. So we have Naval Construction Training Center. And one of the missions that they have is to train all of the Seabees with well drilling. And so when they're not doing those training classes, or even while they're doing those training classes, they've been absolutely fantastic with working with our cooperative group on finding locations that are beneficial to our ongoing efforts for water modeling, water monitoring. So as Mr. Parker mentioned, 3 to 4 a year. We always try to get a few more than that, but those are fantastic in-kind services that Naval Construction Training Center has provided over the years and continues to provide. And we're always looking for ways to expand what they can do for us. The second piece, and I mentioned it in a previous meeting, we're working with Desert Research Institute, and we have been for some time on an updated groundwater model for this basin. So the initial efforts for that have been completed. We're in the process right now of working to get a technical publication release that we plan to bring to this forum, not only here for the board, but also for the PAC as well as the TAC, so they can delve into the actual model itself. The benefit of that particular effort is that, it's a way of looking at what we believe the water modeling is for the basin today, and we can update it. It's a living document. One of the things that we've done thus far over the last couple months, and we're continuing to do moving forward, is working with the cooperative groundwater management team and the TAC. So we've done a lot of work with Stanford Research, and Stanford has identified a lot of brackish water data. So what the Navy's doing at this point, while the TAC and the PAC are getting up on their feet, is we're utilizing that data and our contract with Desert Research to bring that data into the model. So all of the data that we collectively as a team here go and collect, we're taking it and we're bouncing it off of this DRI, Desert Research model. DRI has been extremely helpful in taking a look at that data, incorporating it into the model, and then coming back and giving us some expert opinions on, hey, where should we be putting other wells? What are some potential things that we can do? So those are some of the outputs that are going to be coming out of DRI here in the coming months.
Thank you very much. So the next item is third bullet up from the bottom is the brackish water resources study, and I'm going to give a little bit of a more dive into that one than the other items. And so first of all, salinity in brackish water, and it's really the buildup of salts like sodium chloride, magnesium sulfate, potassium nitrate, and sodium bicarbonate in surface water and groundwater, and these are naturally occurring. They can also be, introduced anthropogenically. But salinity is basically the total concentration of all dissolved salts in water. So that's just a real layman's term. Sometimes you hear referred to as dissolved solids or total dissolved solids. And here's some definitions for you. Fresh water is typically spoken as a less than 1,000 milligram per liter. Brackish water, 1,000 to 10,000. So there's a salinity, and this is coming from the USGS, by the way. The salinity transition zone is 10,000 to 35,000 milligrams per liter, and that's 35,000 is typically seawater. And then there's a salinity water zone you typically encounter that's 35,000 to 100,000 And then finally, brine. The definition of, you may have heard of this before, and that's really salty water, is greater than 100,000 milligrams per liter. And so this brackish water study is really looking at this 1,000 to 10,000 range of total dissolved solids. So what are the sources of these salts? Well, halite and gypsum in the subsurface, these are geologic formations. You can have very old or connate water or dissolution from marine sediments which contain salts. You can have migration from adjacent aquifers. So if you reduce the pressure in one aquifer and another aquifer is pressurized underneath it, it can cause it to migrate up. You can have leaching from saline soils. So when salts are introduced into the surface soils, they can leach down into the subsurface. You can also be road salt. Seawater intrusions, another source of salinity. And then injection, leakage, or infiltration from oil and gas wells is another source. Salinity in brackish water in California. Central Valley has a chronic and worsening problems with the soils with highly productive and high in natural occurring salts, and it's continuing to build up with the use of actually the State and Central Valley Project water contains levels of salt. In the Santa Ana River watershed also is another area that's been identified from 100 years of agriculture, industrial, and urban areas, and near former dairies, for example. Desert areas such as the Salton Seas in this basin, you get evaporation that leaves behind salt concentration in shallow soils, and of course you all know that. And then why brackish water is a resource? Well, statewide it's really expanding, and it's because we have a short supply in many regions. Now, a lot of the regions are supplied by these huge state and federal projects, but with the issues, the environmental issues and increasing pressures, those supplies are not as large as they used to be. So they're looking at any other supplies, the whole portfolio options, and salinity is, brackish water is just one of those. It's expensive, but it's less costly than building reservoirs and additional conveyance, and the prices are going down on the technologies. So this is again why it's being looked at. Just a couple of examples. West Basin Municipal Water District, so that's basically the west side of the greater LA area. They've got a project that's 5 million gallons per day. They're treating brackish water, and that's from former seawater intrusion into the basin. In the Chino Basin, on the other hand, there's been a lot of dairies there and other agricultural processes, and it's really increased the salt and nitrate loading. So they've got a project that's just removing that and then recirculating it, basically, at 14 million gallons per day. And then Alameda County Water District is just another example. There are many more examples, by the way, and they've got a program, again, seawater intrusion is 10 million gallons per day. So the treatment process, there's basically four different things you kind of deal with. First, a treatment of reverse osmosis is one of the very common ones, where you basically force the brackish water through these membranes that have pores the size that can filter out the salt and other minerals. And so there's a lot of energy associated with that, and that's where a lot of the cost comes from. And then you have to flush those out, so there's a maintenance issue. Distillation is another one where it's basically you boil the water and capture the steam, and that removes the salts. Electrodialysis reversal water treatment, that uses electricity and membranes to actually remove the salts based on their electrical character, and they migrate into the membranes based on the electrical charges. And then a result of one of the byproducts of this, or the main byproduct, is brine. So you end up with a brine that you have to dispose of, and that's another cost that's associated. So that's typically disposed of by anywhere from evaporation ponds to, some people have found ways to actually make that into a product and sell it. And then there's also just deep injections, another one, or a few examples. So Indian Wells Valley. So these are the three things that I'm going to kind of talk about, the treatability study, then the work plan, and then the folks that are involved. And so before I get started, though, I think everybody has heard of or may be familiar with the Todd Report. And this is out of the Todd Report. This is a water quality diagram. And so basically, the darker colors represent higher concentrations of dissolved solids, and the white colors, lower concentrations. The white is actually less than 500, and I can't quite read the dark, but maybe you can help me on that, Peter.
Greater than 5,000?
Thank you. So you can see the range that's represented. And then the colors, it's kind of hard to see the colors, but the redder colors represent, the colors actually represent the amount of increase in dissolved solids on an annual basis over the years. So it's anywhere from 50 to 75 on the high side. And then the green and yellows actually indicate decreases. So you can see there's kind of a range of spectrums where you've got some increase in concentrations over on the east side of the basin to decrease in concentrations over on the west side of the basin. And this is just based on the data was analyzed by Todd. So anyway, just wanted to give you an overview, and you can see there are some areas where brackish water is present, and those are some of the areas that we're going to be looking at under this study. So the year-long pilot study was conducted 2008 to 2009, and it demonstrated that reverse osmosis and the electrodialysis reversal technologies were technically feasible and can effectively produce potable water. And they found that study would be more reliable and less costly than water importation. And that here's a cost. It's $2,350 per acre foot per year, which is high. But that's a lot of money. But you got to look at all the options. That's what I would say. And this is based on results from 2009. So those numbers could have changed some. So then this brackish water resources study, I'm going to dive into what the purpose of that, but first I want to mention the funding partners on this. So it's the district who's assumed basically the lead. Coastal Geothermal has been participating along with Searles Valley Minerals and the U.S. Navy. So the objectives of this are really to evaluate the lateral and vertical distribution of brackish water in the basin suitable for development of that resource, and then refine the groundwater basin conceptual model to include that in it. And it will also help us better understand the freshwater distribution and get a handle on what freshwater we have in the basin. That's another objective which we think is a good one to consider. And also improve the understanding of groundwater recharge in the basin, and to provide a better understanding, I already said that, freshwater, and subsequently estimate future and current and future scenarios for demand. So the approach there in the work plan is to delineate, is to do this preliminary analysis, and then chemistry evaluation, so better take a closer look at the water quality stuff that Todd looked at, and then I identify and address data gaps. And this includes a geophysics component, which I'm going to dig into a little, and then groundwater flow and brackish water modeling. So you heard the commander say that the model's been updated, so we'll be seeing how we can incorporate this into the model and then prepare a report. So I don't know how many of you have heard of the Stanford work that's been going on. We've talked about it a little bit here and there, but basically they came into the project in 2015, and these were some of their understandings of it. These are actually, Stanford provided me with these slides to provide a little update on it. So this is what their vision was based on what they understood from the basin stakeholders in terms of what we want to do with this brackish water project. And so the methods that they looked at for geophysics, their expertise in this particular part of Stanford is geophysics. They have a research geophysicist. They have professors involved. And these are experts in the technologies and in the leading edge technologies. So time domain electromagnetics, which has been around a long year, was one of them. And then magnetic resource. When it says nuclear, it doesn't mean there's nuclear sources involved. It refers to the nuclear characteristics of hydrogen. That's what it's referring to, and I'll explain that. But it doesn't involve a nuclear source, and I really think it ought to just be called magnetic resonance, but in any case, I'll explain that. So it's sensitive, TEM's sensitive to changes in electrical conductivity, and that's what, when you have brackish water, it's more conductive. So it's excellent for distinguishing clay units as well, and the more resistive sand and gravel. And then NMR are directly sensitive to the presence and amount of water, and also help you identify the porosity and permeability of the units. And combination of these methods was proposed to assess both the geology and the fluid content of the subsurface. So here's a little bit of a diagram on what time domain electromagnetics is. Basically, you send an electronic pulse into the subsurface, the transmitter loop, and then you have a receiver loop that receives a response, that response in the subsurface, and it basically induces currents in the subsurface, and then you interpret it with this black box, I guess you could call it, software, and it gives you an understanding of the lithology. It also gives you an understanding of the type of water you have and what the dissolved solids are based on the conductivity. Then the magnetic resonance, so what that does, it sends a magnetic pulse into the subsurface, only now they're looking at spinning hydrogen. So it spins hydrogen, and then it measures how long it takes for that hydrogen to stop spinning. And that gives you an idea of, they call them the relaxation curves. That gives you an idea of the porosity of the sediments or the underlying materials, because the tighter the sediments are, the quicker the hydrogen is going to slow down as it's spinning around and bumping into sand grains. And the more porous it is, the longer the time. So that's basically the way it works. And it generates these nice diagrams showing you what the materials look like. So hopefully everybody understands the term magnetic resonance and the TEM now. So here were the field sites. There were 5 field sites that were where these two technologies were applied as kind of a pilot study to see how they would work both together and apart. And so here's some of the results. So this is the downhole. So there were 2 tools that were used. One was a surface magnetic resonance. The other one was a borehole magnetic resonance. These are the boreholes. And what you see, the blue is the free water. So that's the water that's available to remove from the system. The purple is the capillary water. So that's the kind of water that would remain in the system. And it gives you an idea of how much water you have. And so then the green up at the top is actually where there's clay identified. And so here's a comparison of the borehole with the surface results, and you can see they compare relatively nicely. One of the things I didn't point out, you see that dashed line, it also helps you identify the water table. So where you don't have wells, you can use this. Basically, it's a remote measurement, remote sensing measurement to give you an idea where the water table is. And they compare relatively nicely. It turns out that the surface magnetic resonance doesn't really work as well as the borehole. And one of the things I wanted to mention was that borehole actually looks at a very small area close to the borehole is where that measurement occurs. And then finally, the time domain electromagnetics, and this again shows some of the results of that, and it gives you a little map of the types of materials you have and the lithologies. These are kind of nondescript in the way these look, but basically we see some clays occurring at the top and then sands going down. And so the results of the pilot study are summarized here. The magnetic resonance logging was actually considered to be quite successful. It had a vertical resolution of half to 1 meter in terms of looking at the lithology, and it can only be used in PVC wells. Of course, if you send a magnetic tool down a steel well, it's going to stick to the side of the casing, and it's not going to send anything through, so it's not going to work. So it needs a PVC cased well, and then these provided excellent calibration points combined with the electromagnetics. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the surface magnetic resonance was successful where there was sufficient water. So it wasn't as good, but it had some issues with electrical noise, more so than the borehole, which was down the hole away from the electrical noise at the surface. And then the electromagnetics, they correlated well with both the geologic and water level data in nearby wells. And even at sites with higher noise, reasonable interpretation were made. And maybe I should just clarify that. So it's electromagnetic. So where there's electrical or infrastructure, it interferes with the subsurface measurements. So you have to have kind of rural areas that don't have a lot of those kind of infrastructure. And but this turns out it worked reasonably well where there were some obstructions. And the transition to saline water appears discernible at some sites, and that's, again, what we're really trying to look at. And a resolution generally to 300 meters or greater with depth. And they suggested, actually considered an airborne version of this. And I don't know, there's been some news out on this in different areas where the USGS is working. They're actually in Yellowstone right now. They were in Kern County last month working with the state board doing these aerial surveys to look at the subsurface and groundwater. And so this is a little bit of a little diagram on it. So this is what it would look like if we flew it here. You'd have a helicopter, and you can see now the big coil, that the electromagnetics coil that would send the signal down, and then there's also sensors on it, and it can fly quite fast. It can cover anywhere from 2 to 3 to 400 kilometers in a day, and it just really depends on the conditions and how many times they got to refuel and that sort of thing. And it has ability, that particular tool can see down as far as about 500 meters deep. And so when you start looking at a regional scale, it's quite cost effective. And one of the comparison is if you have a 6-inch borehole, it really is limited as compared to collecting this more quickly developed information over time. Now the difference is direct versus indirect measurements, but it can really help fill in data gaps. And so next step, this group is working with SkyTem to develop a pilot project using this airborne electromagnetics and looking at a flight line of 150 to 350 kilometers to explore the following features. Geologic structures and faults. We're particularly interested in this fault or this shear zone that kind of runs along the Highway 14 kind of splits this basin up to the west where the land surface goes up, and that was identified as one of the uncertainties in the model. So we want some more information to help calibrate that model. Also, stratigraphic features that affect groundwater flow paths, and water quality distribution is a big one, of course, for the brackish water to help better delineate that and potential recharge areas of the basin. So that would be working jointly with this USGS study. And so the action items right now are develop a preliminary schedule for that, review objectives in the flight line, security and equipment clearances, working with the Navy, and then we're looking at potentially a mid-December to January timeframe if it all works out. SkyTem is one of the challenges we have is they move around the country doing different work, and so we'd like to catch them when they're here instead of paying for a mobilization charge. That's a scheduling issue, so that's one of the things our challenges we're working with them on. So hopefully this happens. There's no guarantee, but this is where things are going, and I think I'll end there and take any questions.
Okay. Thank you. Before we go to the public, any questions from the board?
I have one. When you talked about the cost of treating the brackish water, if I recall the the last thing I heard about bringing water to the surface, the cost of that was about $84 an acre foot. Is that what it still is, Don?
For pumping water,
Yeah, to the surface.
The cost for the district,
Yeah.
it's closer to $200 an acre.
Now, oh, wow. It's been a while since I was on the board. Okay.
Environmental.
Yeah, okay. So if you look at that and your costs that you had over $2,000, how do we define the benefits and the costs thereof, and how are they distributed? I realize that's a political question, not a scientific question, but can you address it in some manner?
well, I think the way to look at it is by and this would be part of developing a groundwater sustainability plan. You develop a whole series or portfolio of management options, and do some varying levels, iterative feasibility scale levels of analysis on that, and then compare the costs to look at the different options you have. So that would be part of it. Is so you do an updated feasibility study on that. Obviously, in this basin, with the difference in supply versus demand, all the options are going to be on the table.
Hey, Peggy, am I on? The study that we did, 2008, 2009, it was, I round everything, $2,500 an acre foot. That didn't include any economies of scale, new technology, solar. So I think what we're going to see, and you already said that, was everything's getting better. The technology is getting better. The ability to identify the TDS levels before we even start. All those things are major bonuses. So coming from $200 an acre foot of water to $2,500 an acre foot, everybody would stop flushing for that. So I think the reality is, I think we're going to find it'll be cost effective with an economies of scale, with joint efforts. You have acquisition of property, environmental permitting, all those things. The $200 an acre foot is including environmental. It's including a whole lot of other things besides just pure electricity. So the reality is, I think it's doable and it's cost effective in the realm of reality. We'll get there, and so I think you use the, if you'll pardon the pun, the $2,500 acre foot as a high water mark for costs, and it'll certainly be much less than that as we look into that. And these things and this technology you're looking at is totally awesome. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see no other questions, so let's open the public hearing. Anybody in the public willing to make comment on the item we just heard? Now's your opportunity. Don't go anywhere, Tim. Okay, I see none. I have a couple questions. Okay. I want to talk to you. Could you go back to your first slide, please?
You mean the...
Yes, no, the next one. You talked about the Basin Salt and Nutrient Management Plan. Who's paying for that, and how much does it cost?
Don, you want to...
Just for the loading analysis, the water district and the city are paying for that. It was $50,000, and we split that between the two.
Did that get on record? Did you hear that back there? Give me a thumbs up. Thumbs down. Don, could you please repeat what he just said?
So it was $50,000 for the salt and nutrient loading analysis, and the city and the water district are splitting that. That's the first step in the salt and nutrient management plan.
Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about the modeling that the Navy is doing. First of all, it's thank you. I mean, it's a wonderful deal. It's a large investment. The way I understand your modeling is that you have a living document that you describe that we can put data, changing data in to this document or to this formula, and we can introduce variables, whatever we want. And I think the Navy's allowing us perhaps to do this, so correct me when I'm wrong. So this board or this agency or this group can say, okay, what if this? And we can build vignettes that we can design and shape and throw into this modeling program, and that will build us and give us data saying, so if the sky turns blue forever, this is what's going to happen to our water. This will be where we are in 50 years or 20 years or something like that.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. So a lot of what the model's based on is the data. So the model's as good as the data that goes into it. And so where this model will be extremely valuable moving forward and it's happening right now today as we work through the brackish water team and the cooperative groundwater management group, is all of this data that's coming in from these downhole
Geophysics.
Metal, what do we call
The magnetic resonance.
Magnetic resonance. I didn't want to say the nuclear word. When we get all of that data, I mean, those are just pieces to the puzzle. And so all of those little pieces of the puzzle that we come up with through these various studies go into that. And the pieces of the puzzle, then we can run scenarios on it. And so absolutely, that model will be made available. We're within a week of having the technical pub released. I'm hopeful that when we do our January meeting, I have to coordinate this with the contracting officer with DRI, but to have DRI come in here and do a presentation. But the TAC will have full access to that model. The PAC will have full access to that model. We'll maintain the responsibility as services in kind of maintaining that model. So as the team here comes up with data, and anything from private well owners to agriculture to whomever has data related to wells, we can take that data and plug it into there and just make it better. But to answer your question, absolutely, it's a future predictive model.
And I imagine it's prohibitive, the cost. So, I mean, we get one shot at modeling. I mean, we're going to have a modeling system. We're going to use this capability. This is only good for the Indian Wells Valley. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Now, cost prohibitive, I would just add to that the bulk of the cost has been paid for at this point. So it's a fully functional model right now that takes into account all of the data that's been at hand up until early 2016. And all it can do is get better with time. So as we have this data, the Stanford data, the Navy's put money, about $250,000 on the contract for 2017 to take data from the various agencies that are on the team, from the Water District, the PAC, the TAC, whoever has data, and we all sit down in the PAC and the TAC and agree that the data is valid and the data is good. It's a funded effort already. We can then take that data, plug it back into the model, and then rerun a scenario.
Outstanding. Thanks. I want to talk about a little bit about this TEM and the MR stuff that you were talking about, and the helicopter flying around. And I want to break all what you said down to a language that the public can understand and I can understand. And let me start you off, and then you jump on and try to simplify it, break it down so we all understand it. Right now, we dig a bunch of holes in the ground, and we determine, based on the monitoring wells that we've dug, and we take some science to the slopes and the gradients and the isotope modeling and that kind of stuff, and we build estimates, our best guess, or the best science we have on the situation of our aquifer, the state of our aquifer, the shape of our aquifer, and the quality of our aquifer. This is going to be a technology that does not, it's going to take away that spot check. Instead of measuring our aquifer by digging holes in the ground, you're going to stream this technology over the entire basin, and that will enable you to get a more refined estimate for the porosity of the rocks and the probability of water, or the reality of water and the quality of that water that it's estimating. Could you talk in civilian languages about that?
You just did that.
I don't know if I'm accurate. Am I right?
Well, I guess another simple sentence would be, we can use this technology to fly a line that will connect the dots and will give us information on the geology, the aquifer system, characteristics, where there's aquifers and aquatards, and some of the lithologic or the porosity and permeability information to understand how groundwater is moving, what the depth of groundwater is, and the water quality distribution down to about 1,000 to 1,500 feet, depending on how well the equipment works.
So the end product is going to be a picture that you're going to be put on the wall that's going to show a aquifer with a reasonable, an improved reliability of exactly where the water is, how much water is there, and what the quality of that water is, down to 1,500 feet.
1,000 to 1,500.
1,500 feet.
Something like that.
Someone told me in the other side of the mountains that they said this is a waste of time. Don't do this unless you plan on doing water banking. If you do water banking, then actually having those determinations really will help you, figure out where you want to put your water bank. You're saying that it's beyond that. It's beyond just water banking. It's also being able to give us a picture of what our aquifer looks like.
Right. It's the beginning of better understanding the hydrogeologic system that we can then we can test, and we'll continue to build on the model. As Brian was just saying, we're going to continue to build on it with data. It's a dynamic system that actually you never stop building on. You're always adding data to it. So that will then we don't know all the management options we're going to look at, and we haven't gone through that process. We have a sort of a preliminary list, but then we'll use this list to test the different management options to see where we can get in the future. So that could include groundwater banking. It looks like it's going to include using brackish water as a resource. It will also be able to predict with some uncertainty associated with it. What if we do nothing, and where does water level end up in the next 25 years?
Okay. I had another question. Costs. I want to talk about the cost. The first initial pilot program is going to be funded from the Prop 1 funds that the state has carved out from the Indian Wells Valley. Is that correct?
Well, so the first pilot test by Stanford they did on their own, and it was about $25,000. The second piece, the funding cooperators paid for, which was $25,000. We're looking at a $30,000 to $60,000 pilot now, this flight line now, which would get us somewhere between, I think it's going to be 150 to 350 or 400 kilometers, depending on how much time and what area we want to fly. And then there's processing associated with that. So you get the data, and then you have to, they do, the SkyTem themselves, they do a very preliminary processing. So it's computer processing. To get the interpretation will cost another, we've heard anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 for the processing. So,
if I could just jump in again, that's where the DRI comes to the plate. Is that there's a benefit in the scope of work of that particular contract will allow us to take some of this raw data, process it, bounce it off of what's in the model already, and incorporate it into the model. The other benefit is when you're spending this kind of money, you want to make sure you're looking at the right places. And what DRI is providing for us is where they feel, being the experts on the model, their data gaps are. So that we're flying over the areas we need to fly over, but then also flying over areas we're very confident in, so that we ensure that we have the correct calibration of the system, I think is the way of saying it.
right. And then the other thing is, this USGS recharge study, that's the other piece that's going to be incorporated through all this. So that'll help with the recharge study. And it's called a basin characterization model. And maybe next time or in a future meeting, we can have the USGS come in and give a layman's briefing on that and talk about how it's going to all help, us better understand the basin and also have a refined estimate of the recharge here. That's been a matter of debate, we know, over the years. And so we hope that we can help resolve that and have a new starting point.
So this technology, this TEM and this magnetic resonance is cutting edge, but it's not so cutting edge that it hasn't been used in other places. And my understanding is Denmark has, as a country, used this technology to do this, and they've already completed that, and they're making policy decisions based on the findings of this this technology. Could you talk about that for a quick minute?
Yeah, so this was technology was actually invented in Denmark. And the team, there's a couple other companies that do this, by the way, but SkyTem is the company in Denmark that actually invented it. They mapped about 85 to 90% of their groundwater basins. They rely completely on groundwater there, although they have a lot of surface water. They basically dedicate their surface water to ecosystems is the approach they've taken. And so they use this tool also to help educate the public on the aquifer systems, groundwaters, because it's very visual, the kind of products you get out of it. And actually, they've invited me to come there in a couple of weeks and have a 5-day discussion with them on just to better understand not only their approach to using this tool, but also all the different things they're doing for groundwater management and their regulatory and policies associated with that country. It's a very different country, so it's not comparable to what we do here in the U.S. and in particular in California, but I hope to learn a lot from that, and I'm very excited to be going.
And didn't they ask you to bring with you the chairman of the Indian Wells Valley Brown?
I've explored that, though.
1 of 5.
Okay, I've monopolized, I don't mean to. Any other questions on this item?
I have one question. Is there any way to coordinate the USGS function with our function so where there's so you could get a greater benefit, some kind of a greater than sum total, because there's a lot of replication and data collection and things like that. I know they're pretty much looking at recharge, and I know it's kind of hard between different bureaucracies to do that, but it just seems like timing is perfect. So if we could look at their methodology and we could share with them what we have, and you probably already done all this, or you probably work with them, it just seems like the perfect time to put the resources together, synergistically and come up with something even better than what we could expect.
No, I agree completely with Peter. One of the first things we'll do once we get the contract signed is, I think we'll try to get a meeting with the Navy, DRI, the technical folks here, and USGS, and talk about, first of all, where the different studies fit together. One of the things with this basin characterization model is they're going to be making assumptions about the geologic and hydrogeologic properties to do that. So we want to have a team working to come to consensus on those assumptions early on and make sure that we all agree on what we get out of it, that we agreed up front on what went into it. So, and then looking at what kind of collaborative efforts we can do. I've worked with the USGS in a number of different areas of the state for the last 15 or 20 years, and they tend to be, they have their quality assurance issues, which drives me nuts, and it's hard to get data out of them, and they tend to take longer on reporting, but they do excellent quality work, and they're very collaborative, is what I've found. So in the end run, so. I'm hoping that we can really do something special and really optimize these efforts by working together.
I think we got one more question for you, Tim.
Short one. I believe it was Bureau of Rec who said there was approximately 2 million acre-feet in storage at depth. Will this modeling be able to go, is it just linear, or will it be able to go in depth where we can see, is there capacity and is that water there?
Well, it's based on a hydrogeologic conceptual model. So yes, I mean we've got what we've got in it. It can be used for a water budget tool. It can be used to estimate the amount of water in storage based on the data we have, and we'll just continue to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm looking for a motion to receive and file item 4A, pending no other questions. Further questions from the board?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion, second. If you're in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, Mr. Parker. Brings us to item 4B, report by Mr. Don Zadiba on the status of the IWV Cooperative Groundwater Group.
Bear with me on the technical. Good morning. And Dale, just to confirm, I have more than 3 minutes, right? Okay. So how do I get this up? Play button? Okay.
Your time's up.
Uh-oh, we've done that one.
Keep playing.
Did you, I don't know if you have the slides. Did you get slides for him? No, okay.
Uh-oh. Well,
I guess,
You can be verbal.
I guess I'll have to be verbal.
it's in the meeting.
It's in the meeting.
Okay.
Yes, it is. There's actually the slides in here.
All right. Well, we'll have to go with Plan B here. All right. So there have been discussions about the Indian Wells Valley Cooperative Groundwater Management Group somehow being assimilated or merging into committees, a committee or committees of this group. Pardon me?
The word was absorbed.
Whatever. Okay. It occurred to the staff that some of the members of the board, primarily Inyo County, San Bernardino County, and probably members of the public, may not know about the group or what the group has done. So it was recommended or suggested that we give an overview of maybe a history of the group. And just as a side note, the group has been active for 21 years. I represented Searles Valley Minerals and all of its predecessors for 16 and a half of those years, and the last 4.5 years with the Water District, and actually chaired that group for 11 of those 21 years. And I sure wish I had my slides, but anyway, I'm going to talk about the history, kind of what I called the early days on the slides. The reason for the group originally was a pumping depression was noticed in what was called the intermediate area, the downtown area. And that was an area back in the 80s where a lot of pumping was taking place between Navy, the Water District, and Searles Valley Minerals. And they were seeing well interference. And there was concern about that well interference and concern that water quality could also be affected. So the major pumpers got together and decided to talk about this and see how they could address it. They scheduled some regular meetings and decided to craft an agreement where they would cooperatively agree to do certain things to address the issue, not just in that area, but basin-wide. And again, this was in the late 1980s. And no disrespect to the lawyers in the room, but that agreement took several years to craft. It was only 6 pages long, and it was finally signed and executed September 21st of 1995. So you can see a number of years to get just a 6-page document agreed upon. The original 1995 agreement had 8 signatories, and they were the China Lake Naval Air Weapons Station, Kern County Water Agency, City of Ridgecrest, Inyo Kern Community Services District, the Indian Wells Valley Water District, North American Chemical Company at that time, which is now Searles Valley Minerals, East Kern County Resource Conservation District, and the Indian Wells Valley Airport District. Currently, Inyo Kern Community Services District and Inyo Kern Airport District have been inactive for a few years. Since that original agreement, there have been some additional signatories. The Bureau of Land Management has signed on, Kern County. Quist Farms was an early agricultural operation that signed on and was on for several years. They are currently inactive as of the last couple of years. And more recently, Mojave Pistachio, Nugent Ranch, and Meadowbrook Farms have signed on as signatories to that agreement. The agreement contained 7 primary objectives, and I'll read them since they're not on this. Oh, I'm up.
Right.
Where'd that come from?
The thumb drive?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Okay, so now there you can see the group objectives, and I'll just read them. Limit additional large-scale pumping in the areas that appear to be adversely impacted. And again, this was primarily with the so-called intermediate area initially. Distribute new groundwater extraction within the valley in a manner that will minimize adverse effects to existing groundwater conditions, and that's levels and quality, and maximize long-term supply within the valley. The third one, aggressively pursue the development and implementation of water conservation policy and education programs. encourage the use of treated water, reclaimed water, recycled, gray, and lower quality water where appropriate and economically feasible. Explore the potential for other types of water management programs that would be beneficial to the valley. Continue cooperative efforts to develop information and data which contributes to further defining and better understanding the groundwater resource in Indian Wells Valley. And finally, develop an interagency management framework to implement and enforce the objectives of the plan. Uh-oh, I hit the wrong button, sorry. I see what happens, yeah, okay. Okay, so now I want to talk about, what has that group been doing in those 21 years? And again, I don't think a lot of people understand the accomplishments of that group and the in-kind services that they provide, so I wanted to give you an overview of that. So the Navy and the Water District reduced pumping from the intermediate area by moving their pumping to different areas. The Water District moved out to the southwest well field. So pumping in the downtown area has been greatly reduced, and we've seen that depression come back. New production well designs have been implemented to minimize interference with shallower private domestic wells. The major pumpers are drilling deeper into the aquifer, pumping from lower zones. New production wells have also been spaced to reduce interference in existing wells. Initially in the agreement, there was a requirement that new wells be drilled a mile apart. In later years, it was determined that based on individual characteristics of the wells, you may be able to reduce that distance. So left it up to when somebody's drilling a well, if they can prove that there's not interference between the wells if they're closer together, that group agreed that you could do that. The Navy, the Water District, and Searles Valley Minerals destroyed more than 32 old production wells to prevent potential contamination. Searles Valley Minerals upgraded their telemetry. They monitor their potable water use more closely since they've been a member of this group. And they've got lower quality brackish water sources available locally that they use for things like wash water and that sort of thing, which is a better use for that water than using potable water. And as Commander Longbottom has mentioned previously, the Navy's reduced their water use by on the order of 50% by turf replacement, repairing leaks, and upgrading their water distribution system. The Water District has passed some landscape ordinances limiting the turf in new development. We have ordinances 98 and 99. 98 applies to single-family residences. Ordinance 99 applies to multifamily and commercial dwellings. And it's noteworthy that from 2007 to 2014, the Water District customers have reduced their water use by 20%. And that was before the mandatory restrictions came in the last couple of years. And even with those mandatory restrictions, they've combined to reduce our consumption by another 20%, more than 20%. So that's really very significant. Kern County Water Agency, and this has been mentioned, and the Navy monitor levels semi-annually in October and April in close to 200 wells throughout the basin. Kern County Water Agency also initially funded and constructed surface flow stream gauges in Grapevine and Sand Canyons, as Tim mentioned earlier. They were the ones that initially funded those stream gauges to be installed, and the cooperative group continues to support funding those. The Navy conducted several rounds of water quality and isotope sampling to establish groundwater characteristics and flows. The 2003 basin-wide hydrogeologic characterization study was conducted by the Navy, and that included several deep boreholes and monitoring wells on the base and off to confirm that contaminants were not mixing with the groundwater and coming off the base. As Commander Longbottom mentioned previously, too, the Seabees have drilled a number of monitoring wells. Since 1986, the depths range from 300 to 1,200 feet. Searles Valley Minerals is an in-kind service, provides the electric logging for those wells. Searles Valley Minerals and the Navy completed video logs in over 30 wells to determine their well depths, screened intervals, water levels, and well condition. These were wells that previously had no information. 2003 AB 303 project allowed for the completion of a GIS database for hydrogeologic information, and this has allowed Kern County Water Agency to create maps of water level, water elevations, water quality changes, and changes in elevation. The Water District conducted a recharge study in 2003-2005 that was funded by Prop 213. This was to look at storing water within the basin. A second round of AB 303 funding in 2005 provided money to drill 8 monitoring wells in the southwest area and sample more than 70 sites for water chemistry and isotope information. And there was a report published on the hydrogeologic conditions of the southwest area based on that study. The Navy and Kern County Water Agency collaborated to complete GPS surveys at over 300 monitored domestic and major production wells with USGS benchmarks within the basin. Another cooperative effort between the BLM, Searles Valley Minerals, the Water District, and Navy funded and supported some remote access weather stations up in the Sierra. And those continue to function and provide information on climate, precipitation, temperature, and such. In 2007, the Searles Valley Minerals, the Navy, and the Water District funded the original Brown and Caldwell groundwater model, which since the Navy has updated through January of this year through DRI. The group is also responsible for collecting and reporting information for the CASGEM program to the State Department of Water Resources. That's done twice a year as well. The group compiles annual water production data. This goes back to 1975. It's on the group's website, and I'm sure many of you in the audience have seen that information. It's been used in the Todd report. I'm sure we'll continue to do that, regardless if the group goes forward or not. That's a valuable document that we need to keep updating. AB 303 grant funding also supported development of that group's website. And on that website, if you've ever been to it, there are a number of links to studies that were done, reports that were done. There are hydrographs that the Kern County Water Agency updates throughout the basin, selected hydrographs, and updates that information. And it also features the administrative documents of that group, the agendas, the meeting notes, and such. And I think that's it. So again, just to show you, give you a sense for what this group has accomplished, the value it brings, I think it's a valuable resource, and I think the direction that this group is considering to bring that group, absorb them, if you will, into the GSA is the right way to go.
Thank you, Mrs. Zadiba. Any questions before we go to the public?
I just have one comment. Judy, when you got up here and you said that we're business as usual for the last 20 years, well, that's totally incorrect. And I had made this list of all the cool achievements. I didn't realize Don had done that already in this nice charts. We've done a tremendous amount of awesome work working with all the agencies, and I think that was the deal, is that it's a shared responsibility. And so we can move as fast as we can afford to. As a water district, we represent our 12,000 and something connections, or 30,000 people, however you want to quantify that. But it's a shared responsibility. So this is what we're doing. We're sharing the responsibility, and we have been in a fantastic way. I'm sure Tim, is there anybody out there that has this much data to start their GSA or GSP or? I mean, so are they as? No, I won't say as good as we are. Anyways, the point is that we're being really proactive. It's never fast enough if you want something at a very specific time. But the fact is that the costs have to be borne by everybody, and this is the perfect mechanism to do that. So I'm really proud of what we've accomplished in the last 21 years. And I'm really glad that we already have a cooperative in place. I see this group here as an extension of that cooperative. And so I just want to congratulate you for chairing that committee for 11 years. I don't know how you could do that. I think I did it for 3. And I got kind
Note the color of my hair, right?
Yeah, well, I don't have any hair. So I just want to thank you for that, because I know you did that. That was a labor of love for you. So I appreciate that. So just want to make sure that everybody knows the value of this information. This is good, solid scientific information, collaboratively created and funded by everybody. So you just take this process here and you just look at what we're going to be doing next, and this is a good indication of that. So thank you.
Thanks, Brown. Let's open the public hearing and ask the public to comment. Anyone have comments on the presentation by Mr. Zadiba?
Yes, I have some comments. My comment, first of all, Peter, to you. wasn't about not cooperating and things like this. It was about the discussion that was held Monday night on future development. And I'd like to add for the audience and for you, I happen to have been on the Water District Board of Directors when the Cooperative Groundwater Group began. I helped form it. What it was a direct offshoot from the Bureau of Reclamation report. If you go to the Bureau of Reclamation report that I believe was published in 1993, its recommendation was to form the very group that was formed and to share in data collection, to share in ideas. One of the first things, and by that time Peter was on the board, I think.
I was actually on the board when we adopted it. But
well, yes, but I'm talking about prior to that. One of the first things that was done was jointly funded by the Navy, the Water District. Forgive me, don't remember the city being in on that, except they did provide this facility, and the Kern County Water Agency was a 2-day Xeriscape workshop that was free to the public, where we handed out multitudinous water conservation materials. We had speakers who were knowledgeable in this subject. We had hands-on demonstrations. Peter was involved in that, with what you can put in your soil to retain water. It is the idea of the amount of water in storage that people keep talking about, the 160 years that comes from the Bureau of Reclamation report. That suggestion was, if every conservation measure was taken, if water reclamation, brackish water use, and imported water use were all used. And I just wanted to clarify some of that for you, that it was a direct result of the Bureau of Reclamation suggestion. Up until that time, the various water agencies were really not communicating with one another very well. They were pumping, but they weren't communicating. So that was the first step.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else in the public wishing to make comment on this presentation?
Good morning. My name is Elaine Mead. I would like to comment on... Okay. Bye. Yeah, hello.
Next.
I just need to bring some leather.
Go ahead. Okay. I thank you, Judy, for your input, and Don. But this group that is now the cooperative group started long before 1993, when the BLM, or Bureau of Rec study, was done. Actually started in the 70s when the farmers started meeting. They brought in the Water District, the Navy, everybody else, and it met for a long time. In the 80s, it was the ad hoc meeting. And so it has a long-standing, as a committee, as a group, prior to being formalized. So I just wanted, huh? Yeah, it's been there forever, as long as I can remember. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Yes, ma'am. Come on down. Take your time. Hurry up. Anybody else wishing to make comment, would you please migrate over to your right, and then we'll expedite.
Donna Thomas, member of Eastern Kern County Resource Conservation District. I would just like to acknowledge the development of this group, the work of one of our past presidents, Leroy Marquardt. He attended and organized these ad hoc committee meetings for many years, and he was the first chairman of the groundwater group. Thank you.
A good man. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for comment and conversation. Anybody? I'd like to say that whether or not you get absorbed or not, I'm glad your team is here and in place and doing the great work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm looking for a motion to receive and file 4B.
I'll move.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that brings us to 4C, report by DWR on best practices for a groundwater sustainability plan. I don't think they made it. We have a, so let me fill in the gap here real quick for you. There is a effort underway by DWR to bring a conversation about Sigma implementation and understanding and best practices associated with that to communities. This evening they're having a presentation. I think you got to make reservations to it. They're having a presentation on the other side of the mountains. The mayor and I are going to, I hope you can join me. We'll be going to that, and they're going to be discussing essentially what DWR sees as best practices. What tools do you have in your toolbox to use to solve issues to create the sustainability plan that we all want to create? So we're going to get up to date on that today. I'm asking DWR to come out with us, and they'll be here in the late winter, early spring, to give us a really detailed analysis on what best practices are, what we can expect to have to do, and what tools we can use to create the GSP that we all want to create. That was the point of this presentation. My understanding, Mr. Levengood, you probably corroborate this as an accident. Traffic is jammed back up on the 15, and we may not see DWR today.
We could, well, I mean, just with the work, yeah, it was back up. It was longer than we expected by about 30 seconds.
Oh, man. Okay, so he obviously is not here, and so we don't have any item 4C to vote on. So we'll move on to the consent calendar. Consent calendar, all items. We don't have it on the consent calendar, do we?
Yeah. The
minutes.
I'll motion that we approve the consent calendar.
We have a motion to approve the minutes of October 20th, 2016.
Well, I'm going to second with the fact, though, that we adopt we had sent some corrections to the minutes that they're noted on my comments from last meeting. Just with that adoption, they were forwarded, correct, Bob?
I would also, can I amend the motion to include, Ms. Decker brought some points up that I thought were noteworthy that were actually comments made, and she asked to have them incorporated in those minutes. So I'd also like to amend those minutes to include those comments. So the motion is, could you reiterate the motion?
I'll approve. I'll make the motion that we also approve with the corrections that you have submitted and with Judy's information that she submitted.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Someone say something?
Nope. Somebody's phone.
Okay. Oh, your phone?
Not my phone.
Of all people there. Okay.
Mine's on
moving to
silent.
item number 6, appoint legal counsel for the IWVGA. Mr. Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This item is to approve an attorney retainer agreement with the County of Kern, Office of County Counsel. So the agreement will be between this agency and the Kern County Council Office. The board has directed us to bring back an agreement that is before you today. The recommendation is intended to protect both the parties and to allow for services to be provided by Kern County. One of the in discussing this issue, and I'll have either Mr. Hall or Mr. Lemieux talk a little bit more about the legal parts of it, was to as staff started thinking about this, we wanted to protect all of the parties, and so in addition to this retainer agreement, we recommend that we come back with retainer agreements for other, at least the three agencies that are, and other agencies that they'd like as well, so that they could also sort of communicate with council. I'll let Phil talk about that. One of the other things that we suggest, and one of the other reasons for doing that, was that we also wanted to be able to have a backup system. So if Phil's sick, Keith's sick, we have someone to back them up. We also suggest, and this is a suggestion that I think is a good idea, and that the attorneys came up with, is to actually rotate from month to month. Once those retainer agreements are in place, at least the portion of the meeting management be rotated from month to month. So, for instance, we could go Kern County 1 month, City next month, and Water District next month, and rotate that way. That is ultimately up to you. I think there's precedent for that. There are other agencies that do that. There's some pros and cons to that. But we do think that, at least for backup purposes, we need those retainer agreements. This item is only for Kern County's retainer agreement, so we would bring back retainer agreements at future meetings. Let's see. There was one other thing, and it has escaped me. I will let Keith or Phil fill any gaps I might have missed.
I think the one thing to keep in mind here is we need the retainer agreement now at this stage rather than all three, simply because we'll be filing the GSA notice, and we need that in hand so that Kern County proceeds with the GSA notice, prepares it, gets it filed, that we have a retainer agreement for that. I would assume that also at the next meeting, or maybe soon thereafter, we would have the other two retainer agreements. Really, the only difference here from what we've discussed previously and what we were appointed previously is the switch to a monthly rotation setting here. I think any items of action could be appointed to a certain attorney. So if it's a contract and I'm up here, Phil, finish the contract, get it done, or however that goes, like we did with the GSA notification. But also by moving to a monthly rotation, it really protects us if one of us is sick. We can just say, sorry, I'm out today.
The other, if I may, Mr. Chairman, the other item that we haven't addressed that we will bring back at the next meeting is some options for you with regard to outside counsel for water services, aside from managing or doing legal counsel for these meetings. We heard you loud and clear. We're sort of taking baby steps, but we will bring that back to you next time. Give you some options. There's an obvious option with Tony. I forget his last name. Rossman. Thank you, Tony Rossman, who's provided some services to the county. He could do that. There are other options, but we'll give you some options at the next meeting.
Okay. Before we go to the public, we got some questions here for you. So I'll start off with Mr. Brown, and then we'll go to Mr. Levinger.
So, is this? Am I on now? There we go. I sound better now. Short microphones, by the way. Anyways, is the retainer agreement so that the funding for the attorney comes out of the budget for this new agency that we're forming?
That is not the primary purpose of it at all. The primary purpose really is to get this agency on board with us presenting and doing legal work for you when it comes to the GSA notification.
I don't have a problem with that thought, actually. I mean, we all have to pay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it matters to me whether you guys rotate monthly or annually. I know that we talked about annually. The way I thought about it was, because we're the big three. Sorry, I don't want to turn my back to you. Anyways, I thought kind of we were going to pay our own costs as each agency for this functional, I call it a housekeeping functional attorney. And then my thought was we'll pool our money for the special attorney for whatever it is we're going to do in the future, because that person would have to be pretty, I don't want to use the word neutral, but neutral to all agencies. And so that was my thought. Is that whether it's annually or monthly or quarterly, is that still the way? Am I correct, or do I need like clarification? Or
Mr. Chair, through the chair, I can answer that. Yes, I think that was assumed. There was some talk earlier, you remember a few meetings ago, that we had some grant funds and we might be able to reimburse. We have since sort of backed off that because we wanted to be conservative. I think practically speaking, your outside counsel, as you use them, is going to be quite expensive because outside counsel attorneys are expensive. It is likely you're not going to be able to afford to pay each counsel individually. So yes, it's probably going to be an in-kind contribution from each agency, and it almost has to be because. Not just attendance of the meetings, but the legal work that goes. Each agency will decide how much legal work they put into whoever does, whatever work they think needs to be done, and that really is their responsibility, and everybody shouldn't have to pay for if you want to use 2 hours or you want to use 20. So I think that should be considered an in-kind contribution. Ultimately, financially, the outside counsel would be paid directly. Anything more than that, you'd have to direct us otherwise.
Okay, so to clarify, as our attorney, like Jim, who's not sitting up there, by the way, you should have a seat up there, too. The three of you would look good together.
We've invited him up.
What's that?
We invited him up.
Okay, fine. Anyways, so clarifying, we're all paying our attorneys to be here now anyways, whether you're talking or not, we're paying your time. So I think that's kind of a moot point. But for billing purposes to this new agency that we're forming, it would strictly be for an outside legal counsel. Does that make it real clean? No?
That's a short, best answer, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Lovegood.
No, you kind of addressed to that, Alan. I appreciate that. My thought, if it's in kind, we're not going to have the conflict. But I was thinking more of the fact with not having outside or having three involved, keeping everybody abreast. How would we address those costs? But if they're in kind, then that's not going to be an issue. So, but I think at some point we have to collectively look. And typically, I know water is more expensive, but as you mature, maybe we look at an outside. At some point, and only comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I have one, too,
yes,
Mr. Chair. When we first started, I think we agreed that whoever was the chair would bring staff and counsel with them, and that they would be the responsible paying agency for that. And as we move around different chairs, we'll keep you then chair for the next 30 years. But but I think that was what we had talked about. I understand. I've talked to City Council, saying I'm not sure I understand the validity or the need for the rotation. But in discussion with him, he helped me understand that it was more an idea of working cooperatively together, and one would be responsible for that rather than the big three or the big five or big seven or whatever we are. My concern is when it talked about what happens how do we deal with issues of conflict? I asked Keith this morning, and he tried to explain to me, but I wasn't sure. What happens if we happen to disagree with each other? How do we resolve that, both politically and or legally? How is that resolved with each of our attorneys representing us, but representing all of us?
Well, I'll let you in on a little secret. We have disagreed already on some things, and the three of us have been working through it. We found that we do a better job at that when we're able to communicate freely between us, and it's just something that we're working on. There was some issues with, for example, how the bylaws were developed that I'm sure we'll talk about when we get to the bylaws. Our hope in presenting this system is to help the attorneys manage the workflow between the attorneys, I guess would be a way to put it. We know it makes it clear, hey, Phil, you're on the spot at the next meeting. That means you're taking the laboring oar on this thing or that thing, and, Jim and I will assist you. So it just makes it easier for us to understand who's got who's holding the hot potato at that moment. As far as broadly speaking, disagreement among the board, that's something you guys will have to work out at a policy level, and we're optimistic that we will come to consensus on things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's open a public hearing. Anybody?
I got a question.
Oh, sorry.
Just concerning attorney workflow, a monthly rotation seems quite frequent. Does that seem optimal to you three?
Well, I've been involved in it in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes it's been like on a quarterly basis. Sometimes it's on an annual basis. I've seen all of that. I think the reason and Phil was the one who suggested the monthly rotation, the reason I think it's a good idea here is right now at this beginning inception stage, we're all so involved at everything anyway. There'll be a point, hopefully, when things calm down a bit, and at that point, it might make sense to broaden the rotation out to, quarterly or annual or however. But right now, I think we're all, as a practical matter, sort of working on everything together.
And I'd add, part of my thought process also was certain items that will be handed off to the attorneys will take more than a 1-month rotation. But when that happens, that attorney will be given that assignment and will continue that assignment. The rotation really is the one seat up here. And it allows people to be sick, out, have other conflicts. That too.
Thanks, Mr. Harrington. Okay, let's open the public hearing now. Anyone have thoughts about this issue, please come forward.
Hi, my name's Chuck Griffin. I just had a couple questions. Peggy actually asked the question I was most concerned with, which was the conflict of interest, and maybe I'll go a little deeper in it. But my concern is the GSA is a separate entity from each one of these agencies. So we have potentially 5 attorneys representing each agency on the GSA. But if, let's say, Inyo County brought litigation or the Water District brought litigation against the GSA or the GSA did, how would we be represented there? So I kind of see, understanding signal law, that the GSA is their separate and own entity. So why would we not just have an attorney that represented the GSA? Because I don't think a 1-month time is going to create any continuity. I mean, it needs to be at least 3 months, 6 months, or something like that. But so there's a few concerns there, and if you could answer that, because through my understanding, the GSA is its own entity, and to have, so let's say, the Water District attorney represent the GSA kind of throws a conflict in there, I think.
We would require conflict waivers from the various entities going into it. I've actually represented a JPA where the 2 members of the JPA got into a lawsuit together, which was not a wonderful experience. But in that case, we would recommend retaining outside counsel.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Mrs. Christensen, let's close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for thoughts and comments. Mrs. Christensen, could you articulate exactly what the motion you're looking for is? And then, did you say you want to have something to comment on?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, come on up. I'm sorry.
Sitting up there.
I thought you were already done. I'm sorry. My apologies.
Jim Worth, I'm legal counsel for the Indian Wells Valley Water District. And I'll say right now that I haven't had the opportunity to discuss with Phil or with Keith what the retainer looks like or what the representation would be. I've been handling some family matters recently and have been out of town. However, I'm not sure that I would relinquish my representation of the district to represent the GSA if there were a conflict between the two. My primary responsibility is and will remain that of the district. So I just wanted the board to be aware of that as we move forward. I'm not sure that I agree 100% with what Phil and Keith have said, but provided I have not had the opportunity to discuss this with them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can we just have
I think you must have misheard Keith a little bit there. We're going to stay. Kern County's in it. County Council will be representing Kern County. The Water District's in it. You'll be representing the Water District. That is part of what the waivers are. I think what Keith was saying was for the GSA itself, the GSA would get separate counsel.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So if the water agency...
It's more palatable right now.
Okay. And when we come back with your retainers and Keith's retainer agreement, this retainer agreement right now is just the standard agreement that is used at the county. I think all three of our agreements should be identical.
All right. Well, then, if you approve it, I haven't had the opportunity to review the legal agreement. So if you approve the counties right now, I can't tell you that I will not have comments, suggested revisions with respect to that agreement.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Anybody else in the public? Okay, that's okay. Come on in. Don't run. Take it easy. We'll run faster.
Donna Hawker, Association of Realtors Office. So, I'm sorry, through the chair, could you please clarify? I count 5 attorneys, and which attorney represents the GSA?
Phil, you want to give that a shot?
The GSA is represented with co-counsels. So all of us represent the GSA. Now, with that said...
Right. Thank you. Who's all of us?
Okay. With that said, the current bylaws, which we will get to in a moment, only list the 3 because the rotation that was decided upon previous meeting was Ridgecrest, County of Kern, and the Water District's councils. We're inviting San Bernardino's and Inyo's in if they would like to be part of the co-counsel arrangement. The rotation will be for the seat up here every month, or whichever they decide, for during the public meetings. Assignments will be handed out per assignment basis. The attorneys of the co-counsels is Jim Worth for the Water District, Keith Lemieux with the City of Ridgecrest, and Kern County Counsel's Office, and that's sort of a varying shell, but right now it's me, Philip Hall.
So is there a danger in interpretation of Sigma law with that many attorneys representing separate entities?
Well, we will have outside counsel that we will be engaging in, and I think the...
So is that 6 then? Is that the 6th attorney?
You're going to have outside counsel who will be representing us for water issues. And part of the concept of this co-counsel and arrangement is anything in Sigma, we will get a better understanding and decision by the 3 of us coming to a consensus.
And how will that be funded for those separate entities? It's funded now for all, other than the special counsel. Is that correct?
Let me take this.
Okay.
This is the way I understand it, because I'm not a lawyer either. Right now I'm paying for Phil.
Okay.
Whether he's sitting here or he's back down in Bakersfield, he's here, he's doing this thing. Same thing with Jim, who's sitting here, he's getting paid by the Water District. Keith is being paid by, so there is no additional cost or incurring to manage and rotate and have this representation. These 3 lawyers are going to help us navigate our way through the Brown Act, through managing meetings and keeping the flow of our decisions and the policy development moving in a direction that is compliant with law. When we engage at a place where Sigma is being challenged or we're being challenged by an outside agency for some things we've done, we will hire an expert water lawyer who's going to, that neither of the, you don't mean to insult you, but I don't think either 3 of you are expert. You might be. I don't know, Jim. You look like an expert water lawyer. And Keith, you okay? All right. But I'm sure we're going to go for an outside lawyer who's going to help us at that point. So it's different types of lawyers doing different types of work. These 3 lawyers are already on retainer, already paid for. When we do engage at a future level, at a deeper way of understanding and being challenged with our decisions, we'll go with a different lawyer. Correct?
And the GSA will fund that separate attorney?
We're going to have to. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
It'll be uncomfortable, but we're going to have to do that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Bob Page with San Bernardino County. I was just hoping Phil could clarify a point he just made. I think I understood what he said, but for the audience that may not have, when he said that there's a retainer agreement right now that's before this board that's Kern County standard retainer agreement, and that when the other two agreements are brought, that all three should match. I assumed he did not mean that the city and the water district have to match what Kern County's standard agreement is. I understood what he meant was that the three lawyers will work together to come up with an agreed upon retainer agreement, and if that means then at the December meeting there would probably be three retainer agreements, then there'd be an amendment to the one you're asking the board to approve today, as well as new agreements for the city and the water district, correct?
Assuming there's some wordsmith changes to our agreement, I would think so. The only reason why we're bringing this agreement now rather than waiting until then is I need it in place when we do the GSA notification.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, let's close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for comment and consideration.
So, as long as we have the, I know that you just said that we do, but as long as we have the option to amend this, I understand the functionality of it now. Because before I was going to say, well, I don't think we need to agree on this right now, because basically all three of you should bring that document. But with what you just stated, I understand now that you need to have this agreement in place to actually do the filing. So I get it.
My thought is that we've had several instances where we've had opinions and thoughts, and we were marching in a direction, and all of a sudden a lawyer from a different angle would come at and challenge that, and that was a healthy thing. And it's happened several times with both Mr. Worth, you, and you. So, Keith and Phil. So, sorry. So, I personally, I don't see any harm. I understand that it may look messy, but I don't see any harm. I think we're leveraging three good lawyers for the cost of one, and I think it's a win-win for everybody. So, I'm looking for a motion to, what is it? Would you please articulate the motion you're looking for?
The motion is, Mr. Chair, is to approve the retainer agreement with County Council for the County of Kern.
So moved. We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed. Okay, let's move on to item number 7. We're getting there. It's almost 2 hours into this meeting. Approval of recommendations from an ad hoc committee on IWVGA committee membership, mission statements, and organizational structure. Mr. Christensen.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, let me pull the item. This is to introduce what we've done. An ad hoc committee of the chairman and member Brown met on November 10th to discuss committees. And two committees that they discussed, and these committees were related to development of a groundwater sustainability plan, which is required for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. And we attached 4 documents to the materials because, as I've said in a previous meeting, and I'll say it again, we are, and I'll probably say it on the next item as well, we are taking baby steps as an organization, and we are approving things in as much as committees and or the board feels comfortable. So there are 4 items here before you: a policy advisory committee membership list, a technical advisory committee membership list, policy advisory committee charter, and then a technical advisory committee description, which is much like a charter. The ad hoc committee can describe themselves after my comments. I'm sure they will. Their experience. We had lots of discussion, but our goal was to set the membership of the Policy Advisory Committee. And that list, which is your first attachment, is a membership list of 17 members and describing what those members are. That is what we're asking you to approve today, because that's what was recommended by the Policy Advisory Committee, or with the ad hoc committee. The other items were discussed, but no decision was made, and they're still sort of in process. The committee can continue with those if they like. We assume that they will. There's some question. We've had some comments from the public, and even had discussions internally with the staff about the Technical Advisory Committee. We've heard some of that today, and how that would work. That is yet to be decided. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, but really what is before you today is a committee membership. Let me go through that. The PAC membership is appointed by the board of all the 5 members, and here is the makeup of that or PAC, as we call it, the PAC membership. 5 members, 1 for each voting member of the GSA. Those members could be appointed. We typically believe that will be appointed by the members, one of you members, to serve on that. 2 appointments from each associate member, so the Naval Air Weapons Station and BLM. 2 agricultural appointments, Meadowbrook and Mojave Pistachio, are identified. 1 agricultural small. The previous 2 for Meadowbrook and Mojave are considered large or agricultural. So there's 2 there, 1 small agricultural, 2 business interests, 2 domestic well owners, 1 planning with Kern County being identified, the Kern County Planning Department being identified there, 1 environmental, that is specifically identified as East Kern County Resource Conservation District, and 1 industrial, Searles Valley Minerals. Let me also add that we have an upcoming item on to discuss bylaws. It has been the direction we've received and our intent that once approved, that this membership list would be incorporated into the bylaws. So I would be happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure the ad hoc committee can add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Let's go to the public and see what the public has to say about this. Anybody in the public wishing to make comment on item, whatever it is, 7? Item 7. Now's your chance.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Through the chair, Derek Hoffman, legal counsel for Meadowbrook. About November 11th, we sent a letter to the board requesting that Meadowbrook be added to the Technical Advisory Committee for the GSA. And then a few days later, we actually got the agenda packet for today's meeting, and we see that Meadowbrook is still, of course, listed on the Policy Advisory Committee, and we express appreciation for that. And we also see in today's proposal that Meadowbrook is listed on the Technical Advisory Committee document as well. And so we actually come to express appreciation for that proposal as well, and we would encourage you to adopt that, the PAC membership and the TAC membership as set forth today. I'd also note that on the TAC membership proposal before you, there is not a single member on the cooperative group TAC that's not also included on the TAC outline before you today. And in fact, the TAC outline broadens that tent to include opportunity for additional technical expertise and input in the all-important process of developing the groundwater sustainability plan and implementing it. And I will, reserve comments on the bylaws. We submitted a comment letter today and addressed a few points there. I know that's a separate agenda item technically, so I'll keep my comments there brief, but I also understand that the bylaws are presented in draft. And with that in mind, we submitted some comments specifically on the point of the engineer that's described in the bylaws, and just the point that we're trying to convey, and the partial red line that we provided to that is just to ensure that the PAC and the TAC functions and duties are not bypassed or marginalized. We don't believe that was the intent, but we want to ensure that those policy and advisory and technical committees' roles are maintained for the GSA and not overlooked through the processes for this engineer, if there is to be such an engineer that's described in the bylaws. So again, we recognize a lot of work has been done on these committee outlines and on the PAC charter that's before you today. We support those membership and that charter that's before you today, and we'd encourage you to move forward and approve that, both the PAC and the TAC membership and the PAC charter. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joshua Nugent. I'm here on behalf of Nugent Farms and Mojave Pistachios, and I just kind of wanted to chime in and also say thank you. So far you guys have addressed our concerns as they've come up, and I feel encouraged moving forward that, this is going to be a good way for Mojave Pistachios to contribute. As we're talking about finances, having our hydrologist that we're helping be on this TAC committee is also an expense that we're helping to support this group as well. So we just want to let you guys know that we're in it, through the long term, and that we're also in it with our pocketbooks. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for comment and consideration.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
So, Josh, thanks for donating such a high caliber person to our TAC. I hear everybody's very happy with his skill sets, and I'm sure that Meadowbrook's will be equal. Considering I didn't quite read the entire dissertation of skill sets, but it was very impressive. So, couldn't be happier about that. Couple things. I'm fine with the very first with the policy advisory committee. I think we did pretty good. This has already been around for a month, so everybody's had a chance to look at it. The TAC, again, I think it's perfect. I do have one thought, and this kind of new information for me, because the groundwater management cooperative groundwater management steering committee is already functional and has a charter or whatever you call it. And it's working, and it's this exact same group, except for now we're inviting San Bernardino and Inyo. If they want to pay for a big buck hydrogeologist, we'd love it. You could throw one in there too. Is it necessary to form a new TAC under the GSA, or could we just leave the Cooperative Groundwater Management Steering Committee exactly as it is, highly functional, works fantastic, with some added brain power, and not adopt this as part of our committee structure, because I think that would be cleaner. It's working fantastic. I love the adage, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And this is working. This is not only not broken, but it's working incredibly well.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to respond. Yes, we're aware that you heard a presentation from Mr. Zadiba about the success of the cooperative group in general and the way the TAC works. It works very well. As I mentioned, I'll say it again, and I'm sure you'll hear me. It's baby steps. We are creating an organization that doesn't exist, and sort of building it from the ground up. You are right. The TAC. The TAC exists already, functions very well. You could leave the TAC in place and have it be and continue to function the way it is, independent of this organization, yet still able to share, just like the PAC, I assume, shares now. The PAC all the cooperative groundwater group material, as I understand it, is probably shared with the water district and all the other agencies and private entities that are associated with it. So yes, you could do that. And I'm sure Phil or Keith can talk about our assumption on these committees. We just assumed that if a committee was assigned by the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority, that it would, by necessity, by law, would need to be a committee subject to the Brown Act, and it, because it's appointed by us, or by you. If that were not the case, it can continue to exist as it is, and it's not constrained. And I hope I'm not stepping out. We have to be very careful, but it's not constrained by this board's direction. Constrained necessarily, it's not forced to do anything, but it has more independence and freedom to do what it thinks needs to be done. I think that's very possible. That's what you desire to do. It can be done either way. I think there's probably some thoughts from the attorneys on that issue.
Before we head too far down that path, I do need to look at exactly what is the TAC, what is the cooperative group, how is it, what are its underlying formation documents, understand what the membership is completely, what you think its task will be as relation to the GSA, because there are several potential legal red flags there. So not foreclosing it, I'm not saying it's a bad idea or anything, I'm just saying I have to look through that puzzle pieces because you're now getting into an area of unusualness, shall we say.
Well, my intention was to keep it simple.
Yeah.
And it's highly functional. And use the word constrained. I was just trying to think of a way that they could have their free flow of data. It works incredibly well because each agency is part of it, and each agency has directions. And so they share and they, as a group, they say, this is what we should do next. And so they're driven by data collection and data analysis and projects to do. Services in kind is totally fantastic, by the way. I love the Seabees drilling wells. So that was my intent. I know it's new information, but I don't have a chance to talk in an open session under the Brown Act. So that's what I'm doing. The other thing is, I don't know. I was just thinking. If they could just be allowed to function as they are, I would be more than happy. I think the Cooperative Groundwater Management Steering Committee would be more than happy to have the actual committee become part of this advisory committee, which everybody's in there, and then leave the Cooperative Groundwater Management Technical Committee as is, especially since Meadowbrook is putting in another person, and we're also inviting Inyo and San Bernardino to be as part of it.
Yeah.
Other thoughts? Mr. Harrington.
Yeah, Inyo isn't certain yet how much capacity we have to participate in the Technical Advisory Committee, but I have to say it seems to me that the overall intention of SIGMA is for locals to solve their problems, and certainly the intention there was that where locals are doing something effective, that they can keep doing that to address their problems. And it seems like the existing TAC would fall into that category. If it's working effectively, it's producing the necessary analysis that the groundwater authority is going to need to complete our work. So why not utilize it? I think that really makes sense.
I agree. I would like to see that. The only thing is I asked last time, rather than being two domestic well owners, I would like to be able to have mutuals in on that. Mutuals are more representative of at least some well owners, and I know the largest ones. I think East Inyo Mutual had 80 some odd members. Sierra Breeze has a large number. Black Mountain Estate has a large number. I know there's others that I just haven't named. I would like to see a mutual be part of that. I don't know how you would define one well owner to represent all the others, but I would like to see the mutuals in on that. And I agree with what Peter and what you've said, Bob.
My thoughts are, I went to a groundwater cooperative meeting about a month ago. So I sat down, I listened to them talk, a presentation about Mr. Parker and others, and after an hour and a half of the meeting, I actually realized it was the first time I'd ever been to a meeting where we were talking about water and no one was throwing anything at each other. And actually, they were actually discussing science. And there was no politicians, there was no news, there was nothing in there other than science, and it was refreshing. So I'd support right now. I guess how would we do that if we all agreed that we did not want to talk about the TAC today, we just wanted to focus on the PAC, or would we amend the motion, or what do we do moving forward?
If I could jump, I'd say from my perspective on the item you have, you would approve the PAC membership and direct us to come back with something regarding the TAC, perhaps being independent, if that's what your direction is.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
You're not on.
I'm turning myself on. So I just wanted to add something. So this discussion really started in the existing TAC, and part of the concern that was expressed was having open, unconstrained, technical dialogue. I think that's important to get that out on the table. That this, first of all, the TAC membership. Currently it includes a variety of constituents, and all those constituents have technical expertise and background that dive way into the weeds on technical discussions. And that is one of the concerns is moving forward. How do we continue to have open and unconstrained discussions? Another thing that hasn't been discussed in this discussion right here is also looking at expanding the membership to include a domestic well owner, and that's in the current list here. So I think those two things need to be considered moving forward, and then we have a more full constituent group representation, and I see Don standing here, and I know that's probably a concern that he's going to express. I think if we have a good constituent group representation, then maybe it'll ease some of the concerns. One other thing I wanted to add, moving forward, I know people are concerned about having a private or secret meetings or whatever. That's not the purpose, is to have unconstrained technical discussions. Everything that the TAC currently does and moving forward would be reported to the Public Advisory Committee and to the board. And this information would be incorporated in a groundwater sustainability plan, which would be publicly reviewed. So it's all going to be up and put into writing. So I think that's important to think about moving forward. So that's all I had to add, and I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
Thank you, Mr. Paco. I see Mr. Decker standing. He is not aware that the public hearing is closed, and he wants to speak, and I'm going to let him. You got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realize I'm out of order here. My comments have to do with the importance of representation, and Tony just brought that up himself, and I just want to emphasize that the rural community here is the community which is at the greatest jeopardy in our water shortfall, and it's important that that rural community be properly represented. It's just that simple. Peggy has made the comment that she thinks that the mutuals have a better chance of, or a more likely chance of having a technical support person. That may well be. However, the existing Domestic Well Owners Association has a strong group that has been meeting regularly for many years, and we are fully prepared to go forward with membership on both the PAC and the TAC with the objective of actually making contributions, not just simply sitting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Chair?
Yeah.
Can I add something? I think I've been trying to get a response into Member Brown's comments. I just want to clean up some of the language and make it clear what we're recommending. Because I heard the terms absorb being used, and I want to make it clear that legal, at least the two up here, we haven't had a chance to talk to Jim, but our feeling has been that any committee formed by the authority is subject to the Brown Act. It has to be open and public and so on. I think that's clear. My understanding, I'm not an expert on the cooperative group, but my understanding is that the TAC is currently a subcommittee, I guess, of the cooperative group. So I just want to make it clear that in nominating people to our PAC is different, even though it includes the same people as the cooperative group. That's a committee of the authority, and it's a separate entity from the cooperative group. So, and in that way, the cooperative group and the TAC can go on and do whatever it is they're doing. I mean, not whatever it is. I see what they're doing. It's good things. But they can continue on as they have been without our direction or control.
I also want to make it very clear, because it seemed like we were heading down other paths here, that this TAC committee that's out there now with the cooperative group, I am not certain that it's going to be able to be folded in or used in manners that people are thinking because of several legal concerns, many of which I am not going to broadcast out right now. But I want to make sure that we understand it's the PAC that we're approving today. We will look into research and what possibilities we can absorb the TAC committee as it is now into our functions.
Thank you. I hear what you're saying is that you're not sure about the TAC and the co-op group and how that relation unfolds, and we're not prepared to vote on it because I'm not prepared to vote on it because of that statement right there. But so could we, if that's a common understanding among this board, could we revise our motion and get a clear understanding of our motion and then vote on it?
I think your motion is to approve the Policy Advisory Committee membership and direct staff to come back to provide possibilities for using, or for the TAC functioning as existing TAC functioning as an independent body, and that there be no TAC committee of the board.
Mr. Levingood.
With that, I'm going to ask Bob to Alan to get a clarification on reference on the committees and bylaws real quick, just because something we've gone back and forth on up here, but I wanted Bob to clarify an additional question before we go to the motion.
Yeah, just Bob Page for the County of San Bernardino. I heard Alan say at one point in his presentation that the committee charter document that is before this board that you've been looking at discussing, that language would be included in the bylaws. So when staff's being directed to bring something back at the next meeting regarding the TAC issue and other things, is the board then not being asked to approve the charter document because that will wholly be consumed within the bylaws once that's updated? Then is that what you're saying?
No, we have not. Through your chair. No, we are only asking you to approve the membership list at this point, which will be put into the bylaws.
Okay.
We have not. The group, or the ad hoc committee, has not finalized that. Again, it's in draft form. It's intended to be out in the public view so that people can see what it is. But we have not made that decision at this point.
But will the charter be a separate document then, separate from the bylaws?
Yes, that's our recommendation.
That's why I wanted to clarify whether they were separate documents or they were going to be merged. So they're going to be separate documents.
Yes, separate. Thank you.
James Page.
Excuse me.
Married couples get 3 minutes. So
that's
you already
good.
used 2.
Do you get an extra minute for
You
over
get 1.
55 years?
Okay, be quick, please.
I will be quick. I want to clarify that you are, thank you, attorneys, going to just vote on the PAC membership and not the TAC membership.
You're going to find out in a second.
Well, I'm urging you to do so. I'm also urging you to, while you may have some of the same people on your TAC committee, that you develop an independent committee that will use their knowledge independently of whoever they represent. Thank you.
Thank you. One more.
Mr. Chair, I'll have one moment.
Sure.
I'm concerned about the TAC being, first of all, it's unclear about the groundwater management group being absorbed, and then the TAC from the groundwater group proceeding as has been placed and has been operative, because those have been closed meetings. And I think if we'll find the SGMA law requires that everything be subject to the Brown Act. And I can't quite figure out what the concern is here, or if there's some drive to circumvent that, but I think we need to look clearly at how that's approached and has it be clearly defined.
Thank you. Okay, so the public hearing is now officially really closed. really. Okay, so let's have a quick synopsis, Mr. Christensen, where we are, and let's move out.
You're only approving your recommendation from staff is to approve the committee membership, the first sheet, which lists out the members that I read out, and you approve that. We hope that you will. Secondarily, you're directing staff to come back to you with a model or a way to legally and functionally see if the TAC as it exists with the Cooperative Groundwater Group continue to exist that way without being a committee of the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority. Clear?
Or could I maybe help you with that, Alan, a little bit? I think what we want is when we come back is to have some options for the.
Let's keep it real simple.
For the board to
for this
consider.
motion, let's keep it real simple.
Yeah, we will come back with some options for the TAC, working with legal counsel and with the input we collected today.
So the option is approve the membership of the PAC and come back with options for the TAC.
Sounds good. I'll make that motion.
Yeah, I guess one thing I'd like us to consider in the options for the TAC is I'm concerned about trying to fix something here that is not broken. That's maybe the only thing functioning well here. And could one of those options be to get away from this absorbing the TAC into us?
I used the wrong word.
I'm trying to get you out of that.
I
point.
like that word.
To say that it's going to be this board's policy to consult with the TAC and
other outside services. I mean,
sure,
hire people all the time.
Yeah,
and so does the TAC. We all fund independent studies that come into the TAC, and the TAC has a budget, which is nice too.
There we go.
That was my comment.
That's partly where you get in trouble. And that's partly where you start looking at, you are now relying on a committee structure out there that would be subject to the Brown Act and others. And there are other legal issues involved with that too. It's part of why I need to understand the membership, what you really expect it to be doing. Is it providing recommendations? Is the TAC committee a group of hydrogeologists that have gotten together that are representing stakeholders that are coming as a member of the public and saying, we think you should do X, or do they think they've got something other than a member of the public status? And those are issues that create the legal problems we have to look through.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. And that conversation has nothing to do with our motion. Is that correct? Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a motion? We have the verbiage. I can't make a motion.
I made the motion.
We have a motion.
He had a motion, which I was going to second.
We have a second, please. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed, say no. Moving on, number 8, review of draft bylaws. It's 120.
No, it's 12:20.
12:20. Oh.
They haven't observed the daylight savings here yet.
Go slow, Mayor.
Sorry.
On the ball.
Staff, get on it. We will.
We're in Arizona.
Ms. Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to move things along. So it's really 12:20. All right.
Yes.
So we're 20 minutes over our. Okay. What you have before you is an item where we have given you draft bylaws. You had some meetings ago, I think a couple of meetings ago, had tasked both Mr. Hall and Mr. Lemieux to come back with a draft of the bylaws. They have done that for you. And it is a draft. It is not intended to. We gave you the the option to act on this if you'd like. We don't recommend that today. There's enough questions about and concerns about some language. In addition, we still need to import the committee language that I previously referenced. There are some questions about as was mentioned by one of the speakers, I think from Meadowbrook, about an engineer. And that is something that this board will have to consider. I think I won't talk to why that was put in there, but I think the attorneys can. I'll just tell you from my perspective. Again, we're taking baby steps. We're creating an agency that doesn't. And I'm going to take a few minutes here because this might. It's important. I think we understand from my perspective. I've worked in agencies from as small as 8,000 population to 350,000 population. They all function differently. They have, while the principles that they function, that they use to function are similar, the processes are slightly different just by virtue of the size of the staff. This organization is very different in that it functions like both a big organization and a small organization because we have very small staff. We do it on a shoestring. But we have agencies that have very large populations who are used to doing things in a very, and I say this in a good way, bureaucratic, methodical way. They do that for a reason. The point of an engineer is, however that is, there's a couple of ways to look at this, and again, I'm just providing this as a discussion point so that you can consider it. You don't have to make any decisions today, but I think it's good to get this out. When you hire for professional services, or you ultimately are going to produce a groundwater sustainability plan. That is a plan that comes with some risk associated with it. Let me give you an analogy. For some of you some of you have this function, you understand. If a city or a county is going to build a road, they can do it one of two ways. They can build a road with their own staff, which means that they probably have their own. They could have an outside engineer stamp the plans, or they could have their own engineer stamp the plans. But if they decide to do all of that in-house, they take the risk. They absorb that risk. One of the if they decide to contract for those services on a road, which many cities and counties do, they do it for a reason, because they want to transfer the risk and responsibility to someone who has lots of experience doing that, lots of insurance to cover that, certifications, E&O coverage, all kinds of things that help protect the city. So if the street fails, for instance, and you have an outside company do it, they are responsible for it, at least for a period of time. If you have you get sued over the design or the function, because that happens, cities and counties get sued over the way a road is constructed because somebody got in an accident. Some of that liability is shifted to the person that built it. Of course, they have to do it to standard and so on and so forth. But the point is to get that, shift that risk to someone else. So I share that analogy because I think that is similar to what you're doing. It's not exactly like what you're doing with the GSP. So I believe that one of the reasons why an engineer was put in here as a draft is because that's typically how it might work. Now, how that engineer, is that going to be an engineer that is a staff employee, or is it going to be an outside engineer? Understand that if it's sort of a conglomeration of, one of the ideas was that we sort of combine our efforts. When we do that, unless there's some insurance purchased, if we get sued for whatever purposes, for whatever reasons, however that happens, I believe that we're responsible for that, and we have to get some insurance to cover that. You still may have to get insurance either way. But if you hire a professional consultant, typically he's somebody that has experience in that field. He'll have E&O insurance. He'll have all those things that you do when you issue an RFP, for instance, and you ask for those kinds of things. So it's just important to understand as you go forward. Many of you are familiar with these principles, but it's a good reminder that we are doing the same things we would be doing when we build a road. If we contract out or contract out garbage service or do it ourselves, we are shifting the risk to someone else to provide it that does it in a way that is independent. So there's just some thoughts. I'm sure the attorneys have some thoughts as well on that issue.
Can I add something?
Yes, sir.
So let me add that a lot of these provisions were generated by me, also Phil, but I generated a lot of the engineer's provisions. This was intended to just be a draft, meaning it was over-inclusive with the idea that people would talk about it and say, Keith, we really don't need this, or, so it's the idea of throwing out ideas there. One of the things I did in drafting the engineers section was the whole document actually is go through Sigma, see what types of powers and responsibilities are given to the authority, and then try to delegate that to somebody in the bylaws. So just so we could see what it is that we had been tasked to do. Regarding the engineers specifically, to add on to what Alan's saying, you've heard me say that the goal here is to avoid litigation, and that is the goal. That's what we're hoping to accomplish. There is one instance, though, that I think we will voluntarily start litigation that you need to be aware of, and that is Sigma gives us the opportunity after we adopt the plan to file what's called a validation action. And what that is we put the document up at the court. Anyone who wants to challenge it can challenge it. If nobody challenges it, or regardless of how it comes out, at the end of that process, there can be no further legal challenge to the document. So it's a way of just kind of finalizing it, I guess, and taking that element out. So that means that we're going to need to have somebody who's responsible for generating this expert opinion, who's also competent to go stand on the stand and explain it to a judge. So you've got to be thinking about getting somebody who's sort of primarily responsible for shepherding this through, and then is going to be the one who explains it not only to the public but also to the court eventually. So that's what got me thinking about these kinds of provisions. I think that's all I have to say on that.
Thanks. Okay, we have it in front of us. You have it in front of you, and let's open the public for public comment.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, Derek Hoffman, legal counsel from Meadowbrook. Just for the sake of commenting on the issue on this agenda item, I just want to reiterate that I understand this is a set of draft bylaws, and our comments earlier and my comments now that I'm just briefly reiterating are that if there is such an engineer in place, it's very important to make sure that those provisions in the bylaws are seamlessly integrated with the committee language to ensure that the committee functions are not bypassed or marginalized or diminished in any way. We've done a lot of work, and the board and staff have done a lot of work, and will continue to do work on the committees, and it just needs to be memorialized in the documents that those committees' functions will continue to be what they're intended to be, and working perhaps hand in hand with an engineer, but not having the engineer operate independently of those committees. Thank you.
I'm Don Decker. Mr. Lemieux, I'd like to thank you for bringing up the subject that you just brought up, which was liability of the various members of committees, and for that matter, how the whole package is going to work in a legal sense. And the issue of liability is something that a number of us have thought about all the way along. Those of you who have come forward from your respective agencies have, of course, a level of protection from that aspect, but there are many other members, private enterprise and others, who do not have that protection. And where, in fact, is that support, that legal support, going to come from ultimately if, in fact, an individual is the principal source of a direction that is taken and becomes then a target for someone's fun and games in the court. So thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for thoughts and consideration.
We're not voting on the bylaws, correct?
No.
So it's just discussion of what we already have.
Give us some direction as well, yes.
So I understand what you're saying. I obviously we all want to take this back to our agencies and look at all the cool stuff you've written. So I think you're doing a good job so far. I think you're making a good point of why, and why is really important for me to vote on anything. But obviously my board and legal counsel will, I'm sure they'll have some kind of a gesture or a comment or a thank you. It's one of those three or all of the above. But anyways, I think we're on the right track, but we don't have to make a decision, so I think we just let go.
If I may, I think it would be helpful that we set up a committee to work with legal counsels and staff on the bylaws. While I understand the committee structure could be separate documents, they do need to be integrated, so I think we probably should be working on all of them sort of together at once. So maybe the appointment of a committee would be a good idea.
Are you suggesting appointment of an ad hoc committee?
For the bylaws, yes.
For the bylaws?
And maybe wrap in the committee structure into it. So the committee would be working on both, since how they will have to seamlessly work together.
We have something, we call it an admin exec on the water district side, where they're kind of like the administrative function of our board. Then the other parts are broken into functions. So I don't think we could do that right now. It's not in here, right? Or something we should look for? Or?
Peter, that's too complicated for us. I can't even understand that.
I would like the opportunity to make a pitch at some point. I know earlier it was said that the charter for the committees would be separate from the bylaws. I'd like to at least consider the possibility of folding it into one document rather than have two documents floating out there. So I would ask that if we set up an ad hoc committee, that it includes the people that have already been working on the committee angle. I haven't been involved in that, so that would be my request.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a good idea. Actually, I do think it's a good idea. I like the idea of the engineer. I like the idea of someone who is going to be a spokesperson or the focal point for all the efforts, working in coordination with the tactical, whatever group whatever science we use. He's got to be able to bring that science and bring that policy together and advocate for that in an intelligent way that people involved in the world of signal will understand, which is we're going to require a unique skill set. So I like the idea. Personally, I think it's a good idea, and of the engineer. I also like the idea of having a committee review the bylaws and coming back with a recommendation for the bylaws. So now that we've had an initial first blush at it, we can spend a little time with it. We can focus our thoughts down to this committee, and this committee can take all that input from all the board members and from the public and come up with some type of recommendation for the bylaws, whether or not that and how we're going to approach. And you're suggesting, Mr. Lemieux, that we incorporate in to this committee a discussion of how we're going to manage the technical advisory committee. Is that what you suggested?
Well, I'm not sure that, based on Phil's comments, it would be wise to make reference to the technical advisory committee in the bylaws. They're currently in there, but what I was suggesting was we were talking about creating a charter for the PAC. Okay. And that being a separate document. I think it might make sense to have those PAC charter elements actually in the bylaws.
Codified in the bylaws.
So it's all in one, just for convenience, so it's in one place.
Good.
Okay, so that can be discussed during the operation of this committee.
And during that bylaw discussion, committee discussion, I think we can talk quite lengthy with the attorneys about conditions with the TAC, the concerns.
I'd rather do it briefly. It's much cheaper.
Hopefully it will be brief.
Okay, so let's get that committee going. I think it's a good idea. Who's on that committee? Do you have any volunteers? Let everybody run for cover. Is it going to be, you recommended the two we had previously? Make some sense of that. So it'll be the water district and the county, and we'll head up that committee, if that's okay with you.
We need to have input from you said the water district. Okay.
The water district and the county, and we will forward our recommendations. And what's the timeline for those recommendations? We have those? When do you want to hear from us? December. December is the public hearing, so let's push this off till January. Okay. So I need a motion and I need a vote.
For what?
The appointment of a committee, assigning a committee to perform the function of reviewing the bylaws as written.
Yes, this the council.
That will include discussion of the technical advisory committee.
Also move.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Report on draft budget for 2017. Mr. Christensen.
I will try to keep this brief, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. You have a budget here. It is not much different from what you have seen before. In essence, it is the carryover of the $75,000 of contributions that sits in the bank now, and then a DWR grant for $250,000. We've identified some in-kind. We're trying to track the in-kind contributions. So office space has been offered, for instance. But we're going to need to adopt a budget at the next meeting, and this would be, barring some comments from you, this was what we would. It's a bare bones budget. It'll meet the. It doesn't mean you can't modify it mid-year if other sources come in. I think the questions that I have 3 questions here for you to consider. I'm not asking you to consider them now, but I think for the next discussion, we need to come to grips with it. That is, how do we implement a revenue measure and a timeline for that? Also, some bridge financing. One of the ideas that was tossed out, I think, by one of our staffers was maybe it was Mr. Parker. It was to do a loan, for instance, a loan from whoever has the best cash flow. Some have good, others don't. A loan to bridge until some financing or revenue measures in place, or more grant funds come in with payback. Sometimes with interest is the best way to do that, even though interest is not a big thing nowadays. We would suggest that, and then and then a discussion of how under the organizational structure, because this has a budgetary impact. Again, it's longer term. How are you going to fund if you decide on an engineer? I won't be your general manager forever. My boss has told me that as much as I love this job, it's probably more appropriate that you have someone that is fully dedicated to you. I sometimes divide my time. So those are the things you need to think about. There's others. But unless we get some input, we will, or we get some offline information from you. You can always email us if you have some concerns. We'll bring back a budget for you next meeting for the 2017 year. Be happy to answer any questions. You don't have to take any, there's no recommendation or no action that needs to be taken other than direction.
There's no action. Yes, sir.
Just, Alan, will you include in that the estimate of, some dates that came to our mind? Just include dates of hiring of when you're looking at an engineer, hydrologist, when you're looking at the consultant, then the executive director, kind of the time points, and just let us know the amount. That'll be great.
Yeah, you bet. We'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm not sure whether we need any further action on this item.
No
so
action.
This action's over.
You're done.
So it's a prompting for board members to consider possible strategies for funding.
Yep.
Okay. Number 10, projects and objectives of the IWVGA.
Again, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I will be very brief. Let me get to my item. This is just a list of things that we have upcoming. As the meetings go by, we're going to add to the list. I'd like to make this as a standing item so that you can see, and if things come to mind that you'd like to add, we'll just add those. The big ones are for the next meeting. We'll have the public hearing. We'll ask you to adopt a resolution. That'll be your choice to become a GSA, adopt a budget, approve bylaws, although it's probably not going to happen in December now that we've had that discussion. That'll be January, and so on and so forth. So you see some of the things that we have coming. These are, as you get further out after December, they are all estimates and they're all, hopes and wishes, and sometimes they get pushed off. Again, just looking for feedback, but this is going to be a regular item for your board.
I think it's a great idea. I appreciate it. It's a nice visual to have a list of things that we're hoping to accomplish, and we're meeting the time deadlines that we need to meet. Any thoughts, anybody? Okay, we'll move along. You don't need any comments on that? Brings us to closing comments. I have some. Real quick. I won't be long. I want to thank everybody, especially the staff, for all you've done to get us to where we are. I think it's remarkable. We've taken this this pile of stuff, and we are turning it into something that is going to have meaning for this community and for the betterment of all the water users in the Indian Wells Valley, and I sincerely appreciate it. We all do. That being said, that's not also saying that we have no room for improvement. We have room for improvement, and this is what I see from where I'm sitting. What I would like to see is a workshop, and I would like to see a workshop in the next couple of weeks, sometime before the end of the year, by all staff members, where we get in together and we look at process. We look at the way information is flowing from one organization to another. We come up with these great ideas, a little piece of information, and someone somewhere comes up with a piece of information, brings it up, shows it to the staff all looks at it, then they've got to go back, they got to talk to their board members, the board members got to go back to their boards to get approval, and then the board's got to come back to them, and the timelines, it's a mess, and because of the difficulty in coordinating all this information and the flow of information, there are frustrations that occur, which are very reasonable frustrations to have occur. We have in the county. I'm sure the water district has them. I'm sure the cities and other players have them. So what I would like to do is suggest we have a workshop to sit back by the staff members to look at the way information moves within our organization, because it is so difficult. And I think we just need a culture of continually improving on that process. And I think a workshop with all you people who are the actual staffers doing the work and having that conversation would really help us a lot. So I'm instructing my staff to coordinate a workshop sometime, maybe an hour, however long it takes, to have that focused conversation on process and how we move information. Thank you very much. Any other closing comments? Yes, sir.
A real quick one. I see on the last agenda item we talked about was the PAC committee membership appointing. A general question is, do all of the members that have now been finalized as of today's motion understand how they nominate someone to be appointed? Because that would probably be extremely beneficial, I think, coming out of today, so that everybody can be working on putting together whatever packages they need, and we might be able to even do that at the next meeting. I don't know, or January meeting.
Good point.
Tim can jump in, because Tim prepped a lot of the charter information. I think that's what we tried to do with the charter, is to set up sort of the rules of engagement and or appointment, how that's going to work. We haven't finalized that yet, but we could pretty quickly. Tim?
Right. I think the key point is that the GSA board will approve all appointments, and that for the most part, for the GSA board members and the associate members, they basically decide on who's going to be on the PAC, and then it's just a ministerial appointment, basically. And then for some of the other groups, they propose their own nominations, and then it comes before the board. So, I think one thing is we haven't really framed out an application process, but we will develop some criteria to put into an application to propose to the board, so that we can easily review those and decide whether that's an appropriate appointment for the board.
Are you satisfied with that answer, Commander?
It sounds like, based on what I'm hearing, that at the next meeting we'll have that approved, so that everyone knows what that is, so that they can have the packages in place for the January.
I think what you're saying is you'd prefer an expedited process. We can't wait for we ought not to wait for the charter to be completed, but at least lay out. Here's how you apply. Here's how we appoint.
Yeah. I think it's important we all realize that we got to get the PAC going. And that first meeting is going to be the hardest, and we're not going to be able to have that meeting until we have the people assigned. So we need to get going on that, is my point. Thank you.
Okay, I'm prepared to adjourn this meeting until December 8th, 2016 at 10 a.m. I need a motion. Done. Thank you all.